and welcome to Improbable Things. I'm J. Grace Pennington, and this is my podcast where I share 6 improbable things before breakfast, and that would be 6 thoughts about writing, reading, or science fiction. So I'm super excited to be with all of you today, and let's get started. So number 1, I'm continuing to work on finishing up my NaNoWriMo novel Shows. I've been able to stay on track really well so far, actually ahead of schedule, although it's a little bit hard to know exactly, how many words are remaining. I kind of just estimated based on the length of the chapters I already had and the amount of chapters left in the outline and came up with a word goal, so it could be more or less, but for the goal that I put in there, I am ahead. So I feel like it's been going really well, and it's actually nice. It's nice both to keep having a daily goal after Nano, and it's nice that it's a lot smaller because now it feels really easy after doing, about 1,700 words a day to go to like 600 feels like basically nothing. So sometimes a little bit of perspective helps in how we see goals, I guess. But I feel like it's going well overall, even though the book is definitely going to need a lot of work. And on that topic, number 2, I realized even though I had outlined everything and, I looked at the outline and it looked good, this always seems to happen, and it does seem to happen more toward the end. This has happened on my last few Firmament books as well. I get to the last few chapters, the actual writing process, and realize it's super boring. And I had that happen with Firmament Eleftheria and had this happen with Shows in the past few days, where I was writing on these last few chapters and suddenly realized there is basically no conflict toward the end, which is exactly where you want the most conflict. And I don't know how this always doesn't jump out at me in the outline. Like, the outline looks solid to me, and then I go to write and I don't know what it is. Just, again, I guess that's just a different perspective, because I was working on, the last few chapters on Shows, and everything was just like going pretty well, and that would be fine if it was the very end, but I still need to have, for the outline, we still need some sort of showdown and final victory, and that needs to be a big deal, and there needs to be conflict and opposition of some sort, and for some reason that was not there. The character, Rachel, was just kind of going along, things were improving, and things were going well, and that was the whole last few chapters, apparently. So I had to go back to the outline yet again, and try to add in some conflict, add in some way that we can display and really show how she's grown from the beginning. So I want to take something that was a weakness of hers in the beginning and set her up to prove herself in some way, and to prove and show to herself that she's actually changed, that she's grown in the area where she was weak. So I think I have an idea on how to do that. But again, this novel is definitely going to need a lot of rewriting, because as I've gone along, I've just realized certain things that are missing. And for instance, this conflict I'm having to set up now, I should have set more of it up earlier, so I'm going to have to go back and do that. I'm going to have to go back and heighten the stakes, as I mentioned before, and there's certain things that, I intended to have a bigger focus in the story that kind of got left by the wayside, and sometimes that's fine, but sometimes I feel like it really does need a larger presence in the novel. So I'm just going to have to go back and do a lot of work on it, but hoping I can get a few people to read it first and give me some perspective outside my own head on what's good, what's a problem, what needs to change, etc. And then number 3, I thought I'd share a little more about my kids and their reading. So during afternoon nap time, I take some time to do some reading usually, and it depends on how well nap time goes as to what I have time to do, but I try to get in at least some reading. And so my younger 2 will be napping, and my oldest, Violet, she doesn't really nap anymore. She just has quiet time, and usually that's playing with some toys quietly or playing on her tablet or something. then yesterday I was sitting on the couch reading, and she came in and grabbed a book, and she said, "I want to read with you." And normally I make her stay in the other room because she has a hard time being quiet. If she's around someone else, she likes to talk. But I just couldn't resist. So I told her, I'm like, okay, if you'll be quiet, you can keep your book on the side of that side of the couch, and we can read together. So she got her book and she got a blanket, and she looked at me and she's like, "I'm doing just like you." And it was so sweet. And she just sat there and read a bunch of books while I was sitting there reading, and it was just so sweet. And it reminded me, even when she was a little baby, I would think a lot about, I do like to spend time on my phone. I do enjoy being on Facebook, and sometimes I do that too much, but I have become very aware ever since she was born of what my children see me doing and what do they see me valuing. And I knew when she was born that I want to see my kids see me valuing reading. I want them to see that I am prioritizing time to read books. And so I want them to see me doing that often. And it is something that I love and value, but just seeing it in that perspective made me realize that maybe I wasn't prioritizing it as much as I would like. And so in the years since she's been born, I have done a lot more reading, and seeing how much they love books, and they love to point out my books, and they're always asking to read my books, which of course are super boring to them because there's no pictures. And I'll tell them, no, you can't read that, because they do tend to break books I'm not careful with them. But they love books, and they love to read to each other. And just seeing her want to be just like me and sit and read with her blanket and everything, it was so sweet. And I'm super excited to read aloud to them, real books as they get older. But we already do a lot of reading aloud with kids' books, and we have lots of fun. So kind of along those same lines, number 4, the last 3 years, I believe, I've had a goal of 50 books a year. And the first year I did that, I barely scraped by. Like, I had to read a couple of books, on New Year's Eve. But since then, I've actually gone higher. Last year, I read, I believe, 61 books. And then this year, I'm at either 62 or 63 and may finish a couple more before the end of the year. And it's been pretty easy. And one way that I've been able to accomplish that, despite everything else I have going on, is just to make sure I read a little bit every day, and to be okay with it just being a little bit. Like, I think one reason I stopped reading a lot, a few years ago, is that I felt like if I didn't have time to sit down and read for, an hour or two, I didn't have time to read. And that's just not true. I can sit down and read for 15 minutes, or I can just read one chapter a day. And I'm amazed how many books I get through and how quickly, just doing it like that. I have a shake that I make in the afternoon with yogurt and, some stevia and chocolate chips and things. And so I take that and I will just drink it, through a straw while I'm reading. And when I'm done with the shake, I'm usually done reading because I have other things to do. But it just gives me a little piece of time during the day that I'm making some progress on my book. And some books like Atlas Shrugged, which I'm still not finished with, I'm not going to make it through a chapter in the amount of time it takes me to drink my shake, and that's fine. I'm still making it through this enormous book, and it's just helped me accomplish a lot, just having that perspective of a little bit every day. And so I have been wondering if I should up my reading goal, since I've surpassed 50 pretty easily the last couple of years, but I think I'm not going to. I think I'm going to keep it at 50, just because, I think that's a very reasonable goal. That's about a book a week, but I also do a lot of audiobooks, so that helps me keep it up, keep my quota up. And I think that's going to work best for me, just keeping it at 50, passing it if I can. And then that also makes me feel kind of, if I pass it fairly early with, a few months left to go, I feel like it sort of gives me permission to read something longer, like Atlas Shrugged, that I might not make for a great reading goal book, because it's only going to up my numbers by 1. But so I do think I'll do another 50 book goal next year and see how that goes. The number 5 on my currently reading, or actually just finished, I just read our book club book for this month, and it's called The Midnight Library. And I really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure at first, because it just I felt in the first few chapters it was kind of over explaining. It's a very kind of complicated premise. So the premise is that, there's a place, I guess, between life and death called the Midnight Library, where there are all these books that are potential lives you could have lived if you had made different decisions. And the main character gets to explore some of those lives. And of course, in the process, learns a lot about herself and her life and what's really valuable, etc. Very kind of It's a Wonderful Life, Christmas Carol type vibes, which makes it perfect for this time of year. But so obviously that's kind of a weird fantasy sci-fi type premise, and I felt like early on they were kind of over explaining it and the specific rules and ins and outs of how it worked, and that took me out of the story a little bit. But once I got past that, I really did enjoy it, and it really did get me thinking, and I thought it was handled well overall. And it also, despite being kind of a weird idea, it was a really easy read, and especially after reading Dune and Atlas Shrugged, it was nice to just sit down and read it and enjoy it. I finished it easily in less than a week, and it was just fun. It was a lot of fun, thought-provoking, again, easy read, not too much to complain about, and I think it's going to be a really good book club discussion because of all the philosophical bent of living different lives and making different choices and that sort of thing. So yeah, enjoyed that one. So the number 6, continuing a little bit off of the Midnight Library, the other thing that maybe wasn't my favorite about it is worldly. Of course, it is, again, totally godless. The main characters are not Christians or God-fearing in any way, and there are a lot of worldly things that are infused. Like, for instance, there's a character that's gay, although it's not a huge plot point by any means, but it's sort of in there throughout. The main character cares a lot about like environmentalism, so there's some of that climate change type stuff sprinkled in there, and then of course we're dealing with sort of afterlife topics, so it does touch on religious and philosophical things without bringing God into it, really. So, but what I did find was interesting is that, those are not things that I agree with, but it really didn't bother me in reading the book. And sometimes it'll bother me more than others. And this book, it didn't bug me too much. It would be like, well, I disagree, but it didn't really take me out of the story a ton. And I do think that's because they didn't feel forced. Like, it didn't feel, to me at least, like, I'm trying to preach a message of environmentalism to you, or I'm trying to preach a message about, homosexuality or anything. It just kind of naturally fell into the story. Like, this is who this character is. She cares about, climate change and believes this and that. And so some of the things she did just flowed naturally out of that. And it wasn't a huge point in the story. It was just something that came up. And the same for a character being gay. Like, that was, part of the worldview of the book. And it wasn't really like a huge message. Again, it was just sort of there, as often happens in real life. And so I thought that was really interesting. And it also got me thinking, how can I implement that, as when it comes to putting my worldview into my stories? Like, how can I just make the things that I care about and believe and want to express flow naturally out of the characters and the plot so that they don't feel forced? And I think I talked a little bit about this in Theme versus Message a few weeks ago, but it's just it was just interesting to see that from the opposite perspective, from things I really don't agree with, and just seeing them in a way, I think it can be